Ha ha. Hi everyone, Nancy Grace Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Marilyn Manson record, The Pale Emperor. Infamous alt-rock and alt-metal industrial rock singer and frontman Marilyn Manson, known for better or for worse for his controversial look, music videos, lyrics, which frightened many a Christian soccer mom in the 90s and 2000s. His ability to instigate the public and challenge the long-held political and religious traditions of mainstream America made him one of the most hated figures in modern music. This mostly occurred around the very popular trilogy of albums in Manson's discography, Antichrist Superstar, Mechanical Animals, and my personal favorite, Hollywood. However, my fandom of Manson's music, of Manson as a public figure, kind of stops there, as I mentioned in my review of his previous record, Born Villain. And I got a pretty interesting response to my review of this record, a long written or typed response from YouTube's very own Amazing Atheist. Wah! And in this review, TJ categorized me as a Manson fan who only really favors his older, more popular works, and that's accurate. Regardless of your feelings on TJ, whether or not you know him, because I know he can be kind of controversial, he did eloquently explain why he still finds this post-trilogy era of Manson's career to be compelling, citing that Manson is very well aware of the fact that he's been dethroned as America's shock rock pariah, and he has responded to that very cleverly with singles like Saint. And no, I didn't really give Manson enough credit for messages like that, as I glossed over records like High End of the Low. As for the nods to Dadaism on records like Golden Age of Grotesque, while I know Manson is no philosophical or historical slouch, I've always seen him as more of a pop artist than an avant-gardist, even with his ability to go against the social grain and get a rise out of people. Which is not a jab, because it's the accessibility of his music that I think made his message so viral and resonate with so many people, and made him infinitely more relevant than so many artists out there who were equally as critical to the very same norms and ideas that he was, but were more abrasive and experimental. I like that Manson took these occult and morbid and dark and rebellious and sometimes anti-theist themes and threw them onto really catchy, good, well-produced, high-performing rock music. On the Golden Age of Grotesque, though, I didn't really feel like this record was as raw as the previous material that I came to love. And that was due to a multitude of issues, including Twiggy Ramirez departing from the band for a little while. This record and the few that followed it also marked a loss of identity and purpose for Manson, which also made me feel like kind of turning a deaf ear. And the low-budget production and the kind of weak songwriting on Born Villain justified that choice. However, now that Marilyn Manson and his band have switched over to cooking vinyl, they're going to drop a second record on that label. And they dropped the first single from it late last year, and it really caught my ear in a big way. It was just a really good, tuneful, dreary single, third day of a 7-day binge. This song features a steadier, mellower Manson who also sounds kind of overcome with depression. And the theme of this song, the just soul-crushing excess that he seems to be going through, and the fact that he is so tired and so weary in the midst of this journey, and he's not even at the halfway point, just barely there. There's a very dreary guitar chord progression on this track too. The instrumentation is all pretty reserved, except for the wailing guitars toward the end of the track, and Marilyn Manson, who as the song goes along gets more and more intense. His howling vocal performance really takes the song over the top, and I think vocally he's kind of a thrill to listen to again. And thanks to tracks like this, I think the overall sound of this record is a little more intimate. The deluxe version of this record even features 3 acoustic versions of tracks in the original track listing that all sound pretty good. Like the track Third Day, there are other cuts on here that are similarly skeletal, brooding, and slow burning, like the song Killing Strangers that opens the record up, or the song Worship My Wreck, which, even though the title of this track does make me just cringe ever so slightly, the instrumental here is so twisted and depressing. There are some cuts in the track listing here that take on a bit of a rock and roll or a western vibe, a lot like Cupid Carries a Gun, which is kind of a tainted love-esque dark love song. Like the romantic relationship you're having is kind of dangerous, maybe because the person you're in love with is a bit of a disturbed individual. There's even one track, Birds of Hell Awaiting, that takes on a bit of a blues vibe. And Manson and his band, as they step over this genre line, they blur it a little bit by bringing their own style to it, but still. The band's take on this style is so amateurish, I wish they didn't even move in this direction. Especially at the very end, where Manson is just going kind of insane vocally, sort of doing his own weird impersonation of what would sound like an electric blues rock band singer, but kind of gothed out and aggressive. If he had a little more prowess, I could see the pompousness of the vocals here kind of going over not too bad, but the end of this track is almost hilarious. There might have been some people who went into this record hoping for a kind of a return to form or something like that, but there are songs like Mephistopheles in Los Angeles that signal that Manson is still very much in a different part of his career than he was with Antichrist Superstar, because the lyrics on this track are very self-centric, very personal. I think the only thing really familiar about this track is that Manson still finds a lot of power in religious or mythological terminology when he's picking lyrics. Maybe to the extent where they kind of become a little bit of a crutch, where rather than spinning interesting words around these terms, he kind of relies on the historical context of these words to kind of bring us meaning. I'm not really impressed with the prose a lot of the time. I've always considered Manson to be more of a provocateur than a poet. But there are phrases on this record that do end up resonating with me, like a slave who wants to be king rather than wanting to be free, or how he doesn't want no motherfucker looking down on him. Kind of a simple sentiment, but plays into that classic Manson ethos. He's the kind of person who would not even agree with something religious on the principle that it goes against the ideal of self-determination and control of one's outlook and life path. Even though this record is not as hard-hitting as previous Manson albums, there are some heavy hitters in the track listing here, like Deep Six, one of my favorite tracks on this album, one of Manson's best tracks in years, I think. Even though the groove and the riff on this track is very measured, it still features vocally anyway, that classic Antichrist Superstar ferocity. And overall, I don't really think The Pale Emperor is that bad of an album. I think it's actually a decent album. I wish it was a little bit more diverse instrumentally, maybe a little bit more aggressive at points, but I think straight, simple, darkened rock music was a pretty good vehicle for the lyrics that Manson wanted to deliver on this LP. And the few instances of acoustic guitar or piano or plucked strings at the very end of this record were a nice touch. There are better vocal performances, I think, on this record than there were on Born Villain, but when it comes to the lyrics in this more personal era of Manson's career, I don't really get that much excitement out of this record. Still, though, I do feel a genuine sense of despair coming through a lot of his singing and through these tunes as well. And I think that translates very strongly, even if sometimes he overdoes it in the singing department and underdoes it in the lyric department. Case in point, the closing track on here, the imagery of angels dying in the arms of demons warrants an eye roll or two. But this track still feels like a final descent into the depression that fuels the entire record. And there are other lyrics on this track that do give me a real sense of just there's no escaping the very grim fate that awaits you. There's no exemptions from it. I'm feeling a decent 6.6 on this record. Transition! If you've given this album a listen, what did you think of it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? What do you think I should review next? And that's it. Anthony Fantano, Marilyn Manson, The Pale Emperor, forever.